The royal palace of Queen Aracel stood high above the capital city, shining under the cold light of twin moons. For centuries, it had never been breached. Its silver towers reached into the sky, protected by energy shields and guarded by the finest warriors in the empire. The royal guards were trained from childhood. They wore advanced armor and carried powerful weapons. No one believed the palace could fall. That belief ended in a single night. The first explosion shook the outer walls without warning. The sky above the palace flashed bright red as enemy ships broke through the shield barrier. Sirens began to scream across the city. Soldiers ran through marble corridors. The calm beauty of the palace turned into chaos within seconds. Inside the throne chamber, Queen Aracel stood tall despite the shaking ground beneath her feet. She wore her royal armor, dark blue with gold lines glowing faintly along the edges. Her crown rested firmly on her head. Around her stood 12 elite royal guards, each holding position at the entrance of the chamber. Another explosion hit closer this time. Dust fell from the high ceiling. A guard rushed inside, breathing hard. "Your Majesty," he said urgently, "outer defenses have fallen. Enemy troops are inside the lower levels." The Queen's expression remained steady. "Hold the inner gates. Reinforcements will arrive." But even as she spoke, distant gunfire echoed through the halls. The sound was getting closer. The enemy was not random pirates. This was a planned attack. Unknown forces had struck quickly and without warning. Their weapons were stronger than expected. Palace shields failed faster than anyone predicted. A heavy blast shook the chamber doors. The elite guards tightened their grip on their weapons. Fear began to show in their eyes. Another guard received a transmission through his helmet. His face changed. "They have plasma artillery," he said quietly. "The inner gate will not hold long." For the first time, doubt spread among them. The Queen noticed it. "You swore to defend this throne," she said firmly. A loud crash interrupted her words. The inner hallway lights flickered. Smoke began creeping under the sealed doors. One guard stepped back slightly. Another looked toward the emergency escape corridor behind the throne. They all understood what plasma artillery meant. It meant total destruction. "We must evacuate you now," one guard insisted. "This position is lost." The Queen's eyes hardened. "So the throne does not run." But the next blast shook the doors so hard that cracks formed along the metal frame. The guards looked at one another. Survival instinct began to take control. They had families. They had futures. And one by one, the unthinkable happened. They retreated. Not all at once, not openly, but slowly, quietly, stepping back toward the rear exit. "Hold your ground," the Queen commanded. Two guards hesitated, then followed the others. Within moments, the grand throne chamber was nearly empty. Only smoke and silence remained. The Queen stood alone before her throne. Another explosion shattered part of the outer wall, sending fragments across the marble floor. Footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond the broken doors. Heavy boots, many of them. The enemy was coming. Then a different set of footsteps approached from the side entrance. Not heavy, not armored in elite silver. A single figure stepped inside the chamber. He wore standard combat gear marked with the symbol of Earth's alliance forces. His armor was scratched and simple compared to alien technology. His helmet was removed, revealing a young human face covered in dust and sweat. His name was Sergeant Daniel Reyes. He had been stationed in the palace as part of a small human alliance guard unit. He was not elite, not famous, just assigned to security duty far from home. He looked at the empty chamber. He looked at the Queen standing alone. He understood immediately what had happened. "Your Majesty," he said, breathing hard, "the main hall has fallen." The Queen looked at him carefully. "Where are your commanders?" "Retreated to regroup outside the city." Another blast echoed from the hallway. The human soldier glanced toward the broken doors, then back at the Queen. "You need to leave," she said firmly. "This is not your war." Daniel shook his head calmly. I was assigned to protect this palace, he replied. You are in this palace. The Queen studied him for a moment. The royal guards have chosen survival. I am not a royal guard, he answered. The heavy doors burst inward in a shower of sparks. Enemy soldiers filled the outer corridor, their dark armor glowing with red lines. They moved with confidence. Daniel stepped forward. He pressed a control panel beside the throne. The massive inner blast shields began lowering slowly from the ceiling. He turned back to the Queen. Please move behind the throne structure, he said. It gives better cover. She did not argue. He took position at the center of the chamber, rifle raised, feet steady. Through the smoke, the enemy commander's voice echoed from outside. Surrender the Queen, the voice demanded. You are alone. Daniel tightened his grip. He was not elite. He was not the strongest. But he did not step back. The blast shields locked into place with a heavy sound. The throne chamber became a battlefield, and the human soldier stood his ground. The blast shields had barely locked into place when the first heavy impact struck them from the outside. The entire throne chamber shook, and cracks of red light spread across the energy surface like burning veins. Sergeant Daniel Reyes adjusted his stance, steadying his rifle against his shoulder. Smoke drifted slowly through the upper air vents, carrying the sharp smell of burned metal. Across the chamber, Queen Aracel stood behind the throne platform, her posture straight despite the chaos around her. She had ruled for many cycles, but never had her palace felt so fragile. Another blast hit the shields. Warning signals flashed along the walls, indicating the shields would not last long under continued assault. Daniel quickly scanned the chamber, studying the layout. The throne room was wide, with tall pillars lining both sides and two narrow side corridors that led to secondary chambers. If the enemy breached the main doors, they would flood straight into the center. He moved toward a fallen Royal Guard's weapon rack and grabbed additional energy cells, attaching them to his belt. He then repositioned decorative stone tables into partial cover, creating a simple defensive line using what was available. His movements were quick but calm, as if he had done this many times before. The Queen stepped forward slightly, her voice controlled but firm. Human soldier, you have fulfilled your duty. You may retreat through the eastern corridor. It leads outside the city. Daniel did not look at her as he continued preparing defenses. With respect, Your Majesty, that corridor will be their next entry point. They study layouts before attacking. If I leave, they follow. She watched him carefully. Most soldiers she had known fought loudly, proudly, seeking recognition. This human moved quietly, without anger or fear on his face. Your species is not bound by our throne oath, she said. He paused only for a second. No, ma'am, but I am bound by mine. A loud tearing sound cut through the air as part of the blast shield fractured. Through the cracks, dark figures could be seen forming outside, preparing to breach. Daniel took position behind one of the stone tables, adjusting his rifle to automatic fire. He calculated angles in his mind, remembering basic infantry training. He knew he could not defeat an army. His goal was simple: delay. The shield finally collapsed in a shower of sparks. Enemy troops rushed forward in disciplined formation, their red armor glowing against the smoke. Daniel fired immediately, targeting joints and weak points instead of center mass. The first two attackers fell before fully entering the chamber. The others reacted quickly, spreading out to avoid predictable lines of fire. Energy bolts struck the pillars, and sending fragments flying. The throne room that once symbolized peace now echoed with sharp blasts and shattering stone. The Queen remained behind cover but did not hide. She observed how the human fought. He did not charge recklessly. He retreated step by step, drawing the attackers deeper into the chamber while keeping himself between them and the throne. Twice he changed position before they could surround him, using the fallen debris as barriers. His breathing was controlled even as sweat ran down his face. He fired only when necessary, conserving energy cells. More enemy soldiers entered, pushing forward with stronger weapons. Daniel noticed they were careful not to damage the throne structure too much, which meant they wanted the queen alive. That information mattered. It meant they would not simply destroy the room entirely, and he used that knowledge to his advantage, moving closer to the throne so they would hesitate to fire heavy blasts. The enemy commander stepped into view at the far entrance. Taller than the others and covered in dark plated armor, he raised his weapon but did not fire. "Human!" the commander called out, his voice amplified and cold. "You fight alone for a throne that is not yours. Your queen's own guards abandoned her." Daniel shifted slightly but did not respond immediately. He fired another controlled burst, forcing 2 soldiers back behind the broken doorway. Only then did he answer. "I am not here for the throne." Another blast struck near him, and fragments hit his shoulder, tearing part of his armor. He felt pain but stayed steady. "Then what are you here for?" the commander demanded, and Daniel's eyes remained focused on the battlefield in front of him. "For the person I was told to protect." The enemy troops advanced again, this time using portable shields. Daniel quickly moved toward one of the tall pillars and shot at the ceiling supports above the entrance. He had noticed earlier that the decorative ceiling panels were heavy and unstable after the explosions. His shot struck the weakened structure, and with a loud crash, part of the ceiling collapsed onto the entryway. Dust and debris buried several attackers and blocked the narrow corridor temporarily. The sudden silence that followed was brief, but powerful. Smoke thickened, and alarms continued flashing red across the walls. Daniel used the pause to reload and adjust his position again. The queen stepped closer to him now, her eyes studying his injured shoulder. "You are wounded," she said. "It's not serious," he replied, though his voice showed strain. "We still have time." "Time for what?" she asked. "For someone else to stand up," he answered quietly. Outside the chamber, heavy machinery began moving. The enemy was bringing stronger equipment to clear the debris. Daniel knew the next wave would be harder. He checked his remaining energy cells and calculated how long he could continue. Not long, he realized, but long enough to matter. As the rumble of machinery grew louder and the broken doorway began to clear, the queen understood something important. Courage was not loud speeches or shining armor. It was this simple, steady refusal to move. And in that moment, as the second wave prepared to enter, the human soldier adjusted his grip on his rifle and stepped forward once more, ready to hold the line again. The temporary silence ended when the debris blocking the entrance was blasted apart from the outside. The explosion sent fragments of stone and metal flying across the throne chamber. Daniel Reyes shielded his face with his arm as the shockwave pushed him back a step. Through the thick dust, shapes began moving again. This time the enemy advanced more carefully. They did not rush blindly. They entered in 2 groups, one staying near the damaged doorway, while the other moved along the side walls, using broken pillars as cover. They had learned from the first wave. Daniel understood that the fight was changing. This was no longer about surprise. It was about endurance. The throne chamber, once perfect and shining, was now scarred and broken. Marble floors were cracked. Gold decorations lay shattered across the ground. Smoke drifted slowly toward the ceiling vents, creating shifting shadows that made it harder to see clearly. Daniel moved to the left side of the room, forcing the attackers to adjust their formation. He fired in short, controlled bursts, not wasting energy. Each shot had purpose. He aimed at exposed joints, at weapon hands, at moments of distraction. 2 enemy soldiers fell. Others returned heavy fire, and energy bolts struck the stone around him, sending sharp fragments into his armor. One piece cut across his cheek, drawing blood, but he ignored it. Queen Aracel remained behind partial cover, but she was no longer simply watching. She accessed a hidden control panel built into the base of the throne, activating internal palace defenses that had not been used in centuries. But defensive drones rose slowly from hidden compartments in the ceiling. They were old models, meant more for ceremonial protection than full war, but they added distraction. The drones fired light pulses at the attackers, forcing them to split their focus. Daniel noticed the shift immediately and used it. He advanced a few steps forward, keeping pressure on the enemy so they could not regroup. The enemy commander entered the chamber again, this time staying behind reinforced shielding carried by 2 elite guards. His voice echoed through the damaged hall. He spoke not with anger, but with cold confidence. He reminded Daniel that reinforcements would not arrive in time. He explained that the palace defenses were already destroyed. He offered a final chance for surrender, promising safe passage for the human if he stepped aside. And the words were clear and calm, meant to create doubt. Daniel did not answer. Instead, he changed position again, drawing enemy fire toward himself and away from the queen. As the battle continued, Daniel realized that holding the central floor was becoming impossible. The attackers were spreading out too widely. If they surrounded him fully, the fight would end quickly. He made a fast decision. He retreated deliberately toward the raised platform where the throne stood. It seemed like a mistake at first, like he was cornering himself. The enemy commander noticed and signaled his troops to push harder. They advanced aggressively, believing the human was finally trapped. But Daniel had studied the throne platform earlier. The elevated structure had narrow access steps and thick support columns beneath it. Yet by forcing the attackers to climb upward, he limited their numbers at any one moment. The wide chamber now became a narrow battlefield. The first 2 attackers who tried to rush up the steps were met with precise fire and fell backward onto their own troops. The rest hesitated, reorganizing. Energy bolts struck the throne's protective barrier, but did not penetrate. The queen stood directly behind Daniel now, refusing to retreat further. The enemy commander grew impatient. He ordered heavy plasma units forward. Larger weapons were brought into the chamber, aimed toward the raised platform. Daniel understood the danger immediately. If those weapons fired at full power, the blast could destroy the entire throne structure. He glanced upward and noticed the damaged chandeliers still hanging from the high ceiling, their chains weakened by earlier explosions. He switched targets quickly, firing upward at the metal supports above the advancing plasma unit. Sparks flew as his shot struck true. The chain snapped, and the massive chandelier crashed down directly onto the plasma team, crushing equipment and forcing the attackers to scatter. The chamber shook again from the impact. Dust and smoke filled the air so thickly that visibility dropped sharply. Daniel used the confusion to shift positions once more, moving down the opposite side of the platform and firing through the smoke at silhouettes. He could feel his energy reserves running low. His armor displayed warnings about damage and overheating systems. Every breath felt heavier. Still, he did not step back. The queen watched him closely. She saw exhaustion in his movements now, small signs that only an experienced leader could recognize. Yet she also saw something else. Determination that did not depend on hope. Determination that did not look for reward. The enemy commander, partially covered in dust, stared up at the raised platform with visible frustration. His forces had superior numbers and equipment, yet one human continued to delay them in a chamber that should have fallen within minutes. Outside the palace walls, distant thunder echoed. At first it sounded like another explosion, but it was different. It carried rhythm, it carried movement. Daniel heard it too, but did not allow himself to react. He remained focused on the next wave of attackers regrouping below. The enemy commander lifted his weapon and aimed directly at Daniel, deciding to end the delay personally. The chamber fell into a brief, tense stillness before the next exchange. Daniel stood firm at the top of the marble steps, battered and bleeding, yet unbroken. The throne behind him symbolized centuries of alien rule. The soldier in front of it represented a species still new to the stars. Between them stood a simple truth. Fear had emptied the chamber earlier that night, but it had not moved him. and as the enemy commander prepared to fire again, the distant thunder outside the palace walls grew louder, signaling that the battle for the throne was far from over. The distant thunder that echoed beyond the palace walls was no longer uncertain. It was the clear roar of engines entering the city's upper airspace. Heavy artillery fire began striking enemy positions outside the palace, shaking the ground with controlled force. The invading troops inside the throne chamber paused for a brief second, confused by the sudden shift in battle rhythm. Sergeant Daniel Reyes did not look back, but he heard it clearly. Reinforcements had not abandoned the capital after all. Someone had regrouped. Someone had chosen to return. The enemy commander reacted quickly, shouting orders for accelerated assault. He understood that once Imperial forces re-entered the city center, the narrow corridors of the palace would become traps instead of advantages. He raised his weapon and fired a direct plasma blast toward the raised throne platform. Daniel saw the shot coming and moved instinctively, tackling the queen sideways behind one of the thick support columns. Then the blast struck the throne barrier and exploded outward in a wave of energy that shattered nearby stone and sent heat across the chamber. Daniel felt the impact tear through the back of his armor, and pain shot through his side, but he forced himself upright again. Enemy troops rushed forward, hoping to end the fight before reinforcements reached the inner grounds. Daniel switched his weapon to its final energy cell and stepped down 2 steps from the platform, creating a new angle. He could see hesitation in some of the attackers now. The thunder outside was closer. Imperial cannons were firing from defensive towers that had been silent only minutes earlier. It became clear that not all royal forces had fled in fear. Some had retreated to reorganize. Some had chosen to come back. The queen rose beside him despite the danger, and her voice, calm but powerful, carried across the broken chamber. She activated the palace-wide communication system, her words broadcasting not only inside the throne room, but across every defense channel in the capital. She did not speak with anger. She spoke with command. She ordered every remaining loyal unit to rally at the palace gates. She declared that the throne still stood and that she still stood with it. Her words cut through the chaos like a blade. Outside, Imperial troops hearing her voice changed their formation, pushing harder against enemy lines. Inside the chamber, the enemy commander realized time was no longer on his side. He advanced personally up the marble steps, pushing aside his own troops in frustration. Daniel met him halfway. The commander's weapon was stronger, his armor heavier, but his movements were slower under the weight. They exchanged fire at close range. Daniel's final energy cell burned out after several shots, leaving his weapon useless. He dropped it without hesitation and drew a combat blade from his belt. The enemy commander laughed at the small weapon, but the laugh faded when Daniel did not step back. They clashed on the steps before the throne. The commander's heavy strikes cracked marble beneath their feet. Daniel moved with speed rather than strength, avoiding direct hits and striking at exposed joints in the alien armor. Twice he was thrown against the stone railing, each impact draining more strength from his body. Blood stained part of his armor, and his breathing grew rough. Still, he forced himself upright again. The queen watched closely, prepared to intervene if needed. But she understood that this moment was larger than a single fight. It was a symbol. Outside the chamber, the palace gates finally gave way, not to the invaders, but to Imperial forces pushing inward. Loyal guards who had regrouped returned with armored units. Some of the very royal guards who had fled earlier now fought desperately to reclaim their honor. The thunder of boots filled the lower corridors as Allied troops advanced upward. The enemy soldiers inside the throne room began to falter as communication from their outer units failed. The commander realized the shift too late. As he lifted his weapon for a final heavy strike against Daniel, a precise blast from the corridor entrance struck his shoulder joint, damaging his armor. Imperial reinforcements had reached the chamber. The commander staggered, then giving Daniel the opening he needed. With the last of his strength, Daniel drove his blade into the weakened section of the commander's armor, forcing him backward down the marble steps. The alien leader fell heavily to the chamber floor, his forces breaking formation as Imperial troops flooded the hall. The battle did not end instantly, but momentum had shifted completely. Enemy soldiers retreated under heavy fire, dragging their wounded commander with them. Within minutes, the throne chamber was secured by loyal Imperial forces. Smoke still hung thick in the air, and broken marble covered the floor, but the throne itself remained standing. Daniel stood unsteadily near the platform, his blade slipping from his hand as exhaustion finally overtook him. Medics rushed forward, catching him before he collapsed fully. The Queen Arazel stepped down from the throne platform and approached him as the chamber slowly quieted. Around them, soldiers who had once fled now stood in silence, understanding what they had witnessed. The palace had not been saved by superior weapons or numbers. It had been saved by a single refusal to retreat. And as the first light of dawn began to touch the damaged towers outside, the capital understood that courage had returned to the throne. Not in shining royal armor, but in the steady stance of a human soldier who had chosen to stand his ground when fear ruled the night. Dawn rose slowly over the capital, its light revealing the true cost of the night. Smoke still drifted from damaged towers, and parts of the outer wall lay broken across the palace gardens. Emergency crews moved quickly through the city, rescuing the injured and securing remaining enemy positions. Inside the throne chamber, the broken marble floor was being cleared, and fallen pillars were pushed aside. The throne itself still stood, scarred but unbroken, just as the Queen had promised in her broadcast. Sergeant Daniel Reyes regained consciousness in the Royal Medical Wing several hours later. His armor had been removed, and advanced alien medical technology was sealing his wounds. His side was heavily bandaged, and a deep cut along his cheek had been treated. He tried to sit up immediately, but a medic gently pressed him back down, explaining that several fractures required stabilization. Daniel's first question was not about his own condition. He asked if the Queen was safe. When told that she had remained in the throne chamber until the palace was secured, he nodded slightly and closed his eyes in quiet relief. Outside the medical chamber, tension still lingered among the royal guards. Those who had fled during the first breach now stood in silence, aware that their retreat had been witnessed not only by the Queen, but by their own people, through fragments of palace surveillance recordings. The news networks across the empire had already begun replaying the broadcast of the Queen's voice during the battle. More importantly, they replayed the image of a single human soldier standing on the marble steps before the throne, refusing to move as enemy forces advanced. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Later that day, Queen Arazel ordered a full assembly in the Great Hall, despite the visible damage. The broken sections were not hidden. They remained as they were, and a reminder of what had happened. Nobles, generals, and royal guards gathered once more beneath the high ceiling. This time there was no celebration, no ceremony, only reflection. Daniel, still injured but able to stand with support, entered the hall wearing a simple military uniform provided by the palace. The room fell silent as he stepped forward. The Queen descended from the throne and stood before the assembly. She spoke clearly, without anger but with unmistakable authority. She acknowledged the fear that had spread through the palace during the attack. She stated openly that fear is natural in battle. However, she drew a clear line between fear and abandonment. She explained that a throne does not demand perfection, but it demands loyalty. Her gaze moved across the guards who had retreated. None dared meet her eyes for long. She then turned toward Daniel. She described how he had no royal oath binding him to alien tradition. He was not born in their empire. He was not raised under their banners. Yet when the chamber emptied, he had stepped forward. She made it clear that courage is not measured by species, rank, or heritage. It is measured by action when the outcome seems hopeless. The hall remained silent. But this silence was different from the one before. It was heavy with understanding. The Queen ordered that the recordings of the battle be archived permanently in the Imperial History Vaults. She declared that the defense of the throne would be remembered not as the night the palace nearly fell, but as the night loyalty returned. Then she did something unexpected. She removed one of the ceremonial medals worn only by the highest defenders of the crown and placed it in Daniel's hand. The symbol had never before been given to a foreign soldier. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke against it. They had seen the evidence. Even the generals who once doubted the strength of a human now understood the value of his mindset. The empire had survived countless wars because it adapted. That night proved that adaptation sometimes comes from outside tradition. After the ceremony ended, the Queen requested a private audience with Daniel in a quiet chamber overlooking the city. The capital below was still under repair, but the people moved with renewed energy. Daniel stood carefully, his injuries still visible despite treatment. The Queen asked him a simple question. Why had he stayed when escape was possible? Daniel answered without dramatic speech. He said that when he joined the Alliance forces, he promised to protect civilians and leaders assigned to his care. In his training, he learned that a soldier's value is not in surviving every battle, but in making sure others survive theirs. He added that if he had left, he would have carried that failure forever. The Queen listened thoughtfully. She admitted that many of her own guards had been trained in strength and discipline, yet they had never faced a moment that tested their personal choice so directly. She explained that his action had changed more than one battle. It had changed the way her people saw humanity. Trust between species does not grow from treaties alone. It grows from shared danger. Beyond the palace, the captured enemy soldiers were being interrogated. Early reports revealed that the attack was meant not only to seize the throne, but to test the empire's unity. The invaders had expected internal division and collapse once the palace fell. Instead, they encountered resistance stronger than anticipated. The Queen understood that this was only the beginning of larger conflicts. But now, the empire faced those conflicts with renewed clarity. As evening approached, Daniel returned to the medical wing for further treatment. He walked slowly but steadily. Outside his window, workers repaired broken towers while citizens gathered in the streets below, pointing toward the palace with pride instead of fear. The throne still stood. The city still stood. And within the empire, a quiet shift had begun. But the royal guards who once fled requested retraining under stricter command. Nobles who doubted foreign alliances reconsidered their positions. And throughout the capital, one truth spread clearly. When fear ruled the palace, it was not armor or rank that held the line. It was the simple decision of a human soldier to stand his ground. The palace began to rebuild quickly, but the empire itself remained unsettled. The attack had not been random, and the captured enemy soldiers revealed enough information to confirm a larger threat forming beyond known borders. The invading force belonged to a militant coalition that believed the empire had grown soft through diplomacy and internal politics. Their goal was not simply to conquer territory, but to break confidence at the center of power. And they had targeted the throne directly because they believed once the Queen fell, the rest of the systems would collapse into division. Instead, the opposite had happened. The throne survived, and unity grew stronger. In the weeks that followed, Queen Aracel reorganized the royal defense structure. She did not punish the guards publicly, but she did remove several commanders from high positions. Training standards were raised. Emergency protocols were rewritten. Most importantly, she ordered joint training exercises between alien units and human alliance forces. At first, there was tension. Some alien soldiers still carried pride that made cooperation difficult. However, the image of Daniel standing alone in the throne chamber remained fresh in everyone's mind. That image could not be erased. Daniel himself returned to limited duty sooner than medical staff recommended. His injuries had healed enough for movement, though scars remained visible across his side and face. He did not seek recognition or special treatment. He reported to training fields, working alongside alien units, demonstrating human defensive tactics that focused on flexibility and layered fallback positions. Instead of relying only on superior technology, he emphasized reading terrain, predicting enemy behavior, and maintaining calm communication under stress. Gradually, respect replaced hesitation. While internal unity strengthened, reports from the frontier grew darker. The militant coalition was regrouping, this time with larger fleets. Intelligence suggested they were gathering support from minor systems that feared imperial expansion. The coalition leaders believed the palace attack had failed because they underestimated resistance. Their next move would not be limited to one city. It would target multiple border systems at once, stretching imperial defenses thin. The War Council assembled again, this time not in panic, but in preparation. Generals studied holographic projections of possible invasion routes. Some argued for a preemptive strike, to crush the coalition before it could organize. Others recommended strengthening defensive positions and forcing the enemy to overextend. Daniel, invited now as an official military advisor, examined the data carefully. He noticed that the coalition depended heavily on fast-moving strike ships that required frequent refueling from mobile carriers. Without those carriers, their attack speed would drop significantly. Daniel proposed a plan that combined both strategies. Instead of launching a massive fleet directly at the coalition, the Empire would deploy smaller hunter groups trained to track and disable refueling carriers. This would weaken the enemy's mobility before the main fleet engaged. The plan required precision and patience, not overwhelming force. Some commanders were skeptical, but Queen Arazel supported the approach. She had seen the value of patience before. Within days, specialized Imperial units moved quietly toward the frontier. Daniel joined one of the advisory ships, not as a frontline fighter, but as a tactical coordinator. The mission was dangerous. If discovered too early, the hunter groups could be surrounded. But the Empire now trusted adaptive strategy over blind strength. And the first encounter occurred near a dense asteroid field. Coalition strike ships were refueling from a massive carrier hidden within the rocks. Imperial hunter groups approached under low signatures, using asteroid shadows to mask movement. At Daniel's signal, coordinated attacks disabled the carrier's propulsion systems without destroying it outright. Coalition strike ships scattered in confusion, suddenly without support. The hunter groups withdrew quickly, avoiding direct heavy combat. Similar operations followed across multiple sectors, slowly cutting into the coalition's mobility. When the main fleets finally clashed weeks later, the difference was clear. Coalition ships moved slower, their coordination weaker. Imperial forces, trained under new joint tactics, fought with improved flexibility. Alien heavy cruisers provided strength, while smaller human-designed vessels exploited openings. The battle was fierce, but the coalition's expected quick victory never came. Instead, they found themselves losing ground steadily. News of the successful operations spread across the Empire. Citizens who once feared collapse now saw evidence of strength built on cooperation. The story of the throne chamber had become more than a memory. It had become a symbol guiding military reform. Daniel never claimed credit publicly. He focused on his duty, often reminding younger soldiers that no single person wins a war alone. During a critical engagement near the frontier world of Talrin, coalition forces attempted one final direct assault. They targeted a civilian transport convoy to force Imperial fleets into a trap. Daniel, a monitoring battlefield data, recognized the pattern immediately. Instead of rushing into pursuit, he advised splitting the fleet into layered formations, sending faster ships to evacuate civilians while heavy cruisers flanked the trap zone. The maneuver worked. Civilians were saved, and coalition ambush ships were caught between converging forces. The battle marked the collapse of the coalition's offensive power. Surviving enemy leaders retreated beyond known borders, their alliance fractured by failure. The Empire did not chase recklessly. Queen Aracel ordered border stabilization and focused on rebuilding systems damaged by conflict. The goal was no longer revenge, but security. Months later, the capital stood stronger than before. Repaired towers gleamed under the twin moons. Joint alien-human patrols moved through the skies. And in the Great Hall, a new ceremony was held, not to celebrate victory alone, but to honor unity. Daniel stood among officers from multiple species, no longer seen as an outsider. When Queen Aracel addressed the assembly, she spoke not of a single battle, but of transformation. She reminded her people that strength without loyalty collapses, and loyalty without courage is empty. The night the guards fled had nearly broken the Empire. Instead, it revealed a deeper foundation. The choice of one human soldier to stand firm had forced an entire system to confront its weakness and rebuild stronger. And as peace settled once more over the capital, it was clear that the true price of standing had not been pain or scars. It had been responsibility. The Empire now carried that responsibility together, bound not only by tradition, but by shared resolve. Peace did not return in a single moment. It arrived slowly, like dawn after a long and violent storm. The borders of the Empire remained guarded. Patrol fleets moved constantly, and intelligence networks watched for any sign of the militant coalition rebuilding. But inside the capital, something deeper had changed. The people no longer spoke about the attack as a near disaster. They spoke about it as a turning point. The night the palace fell had become the night the Empire remembered what loyalty truly meant. Queen Aracel understood that victories in battle fade unless they shape the future. She began restructuring not only the military, but also the education of future royal guards. Training academies added new lessons focused on moral choice under pressure. The recruits were taught that courage is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet and steady. It is the decision to remain when escape feels easier. The image of a single human soldier standing before the throne was included in official historical archives and instructional materials, not as propaganda, but as a reminder. Sergeant Daniel Reyes never asked for statues or titles, but recognition came regardless. He was offered permanent command within the Imperial Guard. He accepted only on the condition that the position remain open to soldiers of all species based on merit, not birth. The Queen agreed. For the first time in Imperial history, a joint species command unit was formed, led by officers selected for character as much as skill. Some traditional nobles resisted quietly, but they could not argue against results. And the new unit became known for discipline, adaptability, and unbreakable cohesion. Months later, during a formal gathering in the restored throne chamber, Queen Aracel addressed not only her court, but representatives from allied systems. She spoke about fear openly. She admitted that even rulers feel fear when everything around them begins to collapse. What matters, she said, is not the absence of fear, but the presence of someone willing to stand despite it. She described how, in the moment when her own guards retreated, the throne did not feel powerful. It felt fragile. And yet one soldier's refusal to move restored that power. Daniel stood quietly to the side during the ceremony. His uniform was simple, without excessive decoration. The scars on his face remained visible, faint but permanent. When invited to speak, he kept his words short. He did not speak of heroism. He spoke of training, of discipline, and of responsibility. He said that every soldier, whether human or alien, is given moments where they must choose who they are. In that throne chamber, he had simply chosen to follow his oath. He reminded the assembly that the Empire survived because many others had returned to fight after fear passed. The royal guards who once fled had also changed. Many of them completed the new training programs with renewed focus. Some personally approached Daniel to thank him, not only for defending the queen, but for forcing them to confront their own weakness. The culture inside the palace shifted from pride in status to pride in reliability. Trust grew stronger than before the attack. Beyond the capital, alliances strengthened. Systems that once doubted cooperation between species began requesting joint defense agreements. The story of the throne chamber spread across distant stars, often told differently depending on who shared it. Some called it the Night of Smoke. Others called it the Stand of the Human. Whatever the name, the lesson remained clear. Loyalty is not limited by origin. Years later, when new threats appeared along the outer frontier, the Empire responded not with panic, but with coordinated strength. Mixed fleets moved efficiently, guided by strategies built on flexibility rather than rigid tradition. The militant coalition that once sought to break the empire eventually dissolved, its leaders defeated not by overwhelming force, but by consistent unity and adaptive response. In quiet moments, Queen Arazel would sometimes return alone to the restored throne chamber. The marble had been repaired, the pillars rebuilt, and the ceiling restored to its original design. Yet one small section of cracked stone near the platform was left untouched by her order. It marked the place where Daniel had first taken his stand. It was not polished or covered. It remained as a reminder that strength is proven in imperfection. The empire moved forward into a new era, shaped not only by rulers and fleets, but by the memory of a choice made in smoke and fire. The royal guards now stood with greater discipline. The citizens trusted their leaders more deeply, and humanity, once viewed as young and untested, became recognized as a steady ally whose greatest weapon was not technology, but resolve. When historians later wrote about that night, they did not focus on the explosions or the damage. They focused on a single image, a throne chamber filled with fear, a ruler standing alone, and a human soldier who refused to step aside. In that moment, species did not matter. Rank did not matter. What mattered was the simple decision to hold the line. And so the story of the palace attack became more than a tale of survival. It became a legacy, a reminder across generations that when fear spreads and walls begin to fall, courage from even one individual can change the fate of an empire.